So look, thank you everyone, welcome. Firstly, just like to acknowledge that we're all meeting and sitting on different First Nations countries. I'm here from Mbarntoa Alice Springs, so in Aranda country, and yeah, I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and acknowledge that we're all on land that was never ceded. Look, if people like to go around the room and just introduce themselves, and given that we've got a smallish number, even you can say a couple of things about previous lobbying experience if you'd like to. So maybe we can start up left-hand corner with Margaret.
I'm Margaret Clark, and I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land in Canberra, and I'm from the Quaker Peace and Legislation Committee, so we're the national advocacy lobbying witness arm for Australian Quakers. And my lobbying experience is on both sides of the table, so I've worked for I've worked for senators and worked for major departments where people have come and lobbied me. So I have a pretty good understanding of how it feels or can feel on that side. I've also been part of NGOs who've been lobbying governments in different parts of the country, well, different parts of the world, actually. And so what I've offered Jonathan to come and talk about a couple of instruments that are used by the Friends National Committee on Legislation in the States, which is the US Quakers lobbying arm. And we've been given permission to kind of adjust their paperwork, their instruments for the Australian context. So, so we've done lobbying workshops ourselves, and we have 2 more set up in 23. So I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Margaret. Colin.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Adelaide, a member of IPAN. I've talked to a few politicians. I don't really have a lot of lobbying experience, no.
That's all right. Welcome aboard.
So this will be good.
And Derek.
Yeah, Derek Burke, IPAN, South Australia and Spirit of Eureka, from Ghana country, Adelaide Plains. My lobbying experience has been pretty minimal. Back in the 90s, I was part of the delegation that met a local Labor MP. Interesting experience, a disappointing experience, but anyway, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Derek. Peter?
Hi, everyone. Peter Harpers. I'm on Ghana land, and I'm a member of IPAN in South Australia. And as far as lobbying goes, I've really not done any in the past.
Thanks, Peter. And Robin? Can you hear us? Yep, sorry.
Robin's muted.
Muted, Robin.
Sorry about that.
Right.
Perfect.
I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Canberra. I've done a little bit of lobbying, environmental things, and I've lobbied for the Greens, and I have also been in touch with Alicia Payne, not about this, but other matters, and she's a very willing listener. So I hope to speak to her.
Great. And Shanaz?
For me, I haven't had very much experience in what you call lobbying, but I do attend events that the local politicians go to when I know that they're going to be there, and make sure that, you know, I do engage with them, just like to say hello so that they know who I am. Yeah, that's my experience. And before I'll wait till your you two are finished too, then I've got a question for Margaret after. I'm happy
Yep.
to wait.
Yep, and we'll get to kind of some of the housekeeping and questions and so forth. So thanks, Shanaz. And I can only see you as D. Higg. Sorry, what's your first name?
David.
David. Hi, David.
I actually used to be a lobbyist, so I shouldn't admit that, should I?
Yay!
Absolutely.
Yay!
Who are you lobbying for?
It was relatively clean. It was.
Sorry, I couldn't. Sorry, we might just get people to mute. I'm struggling to. Yeah, if they're not speaking.
Yeah. So I've joined IPAN. I'm very disturbed at the way government is, in fact, Labor government is moving. So I guess that's the major concern that I've got, and probably the major concern shared by others. There is one comment I just want to make, is that Richard Miles is a graduate of Geelong Grammar, and he does remind me of the old adage that you can take the boy out of Geelong Grammar, but you can't take Geelong Grammar out of the boy. So that's about, and obviously I'm no longer a lobbyist.
Point well made. Thank you. And I should give a bit more of an introduction to myself. So Jonathan Pilbrow, I'm Secretary of IPAN. I'm one of the Northern Territory reps based, as I said, in Mbrantwa, Alice Springs. I've spent 20 years in the NGO sector working in the COS network, so working for the Northern Territory Council of Social Service. So less so the last 10 years, but certainly between 2004, 2013, had quite regular meetings with ministers. I now work for myself doing contract work, so I have less direct contact with ministers. So I've had some experience, but always more to learn. So yeah, I'm keen to see what I get out of this session as well. So thank you, everyone. So just jump to the first. I'll share the PowerPoint screen just to kind of so people are obviously aware of the People's Inquiry, and IPAN is keen to see the inquiry report handed to each of the 151 federal politicians. So hence we thought it was important to have a briefing session such as this. Obviously, hearing from people this morning, there's a divergence in experience, some with quite a lot, some with less. Yeah, just keen to ensure that everyone's going to feel comfortable meeting with their local MP and presenting the report. So it's really about equipping people with potentially some lobbying skills, but also some of the key points that we would like to see focused about the report in meetings with the politicians. This PowerPoint presentation I'll send out to everyone after the meeting. I should have everyone's email address, and we'll provide information to people about if they're not sure of which MP they're going to be meeting with, or if they're meeting with them with somebody else. I'll make all that information available to everybody. I'll do individual emails to the people on the meeting today. We've got a couple of handouts that we can provide people on roadmap for lobbying and top tip sheets. We'll let people know how to keep in touch with IPAN and about feeding back from the meetings that they have with politicians. If people need more copies of the report, I'll mention that at the end. And look, if people can hold questions where possible to the end, only that I'll be looking at the PowerPoint on my screen, not who's got their hands up necessarily. But if there's something that you do need to clarify in the moment, yeah, then feel free to do that. So, right, without any further ado, can people see the PowerPoint screen fine? Yep. So yeah, people would have, has everyone seen the report? Anyone who hasn't had a copy of the report, just so that I'm kind of, pretty much everyone's got a copy, so they know what we're talking about. Yeah, so people are aware of the heading, the title of the report. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming along today and for offering to meet your local MP. We see these meetings as critical to IPAN rolling the report about across the country. The report was a major exercise, but the bigger job is actually getting the report out in the community, having it read, having the recommendations put forward, and having the report actually influencing the broader Australian public, and particularly federal politicians as we move forward. We are aiming to recruit 151 volunteers, or volunteers to visit 151 politicians. We're up to about 50, so yep, a third of the way. And some of the meetings have already started rolling out, and we're keen for meetings to really start happening as soon as possible. Just a little bit of background on the report. 283 submissions came in, mainly from everyday Australians, although several from public identities. We had former Western Australian Premier Jeff Gallop put in a submission. We had former South Australian Premier Lynn Arnold put in a submission. And key organisations such as Australian Conservation Foundation, Medical Association for Prevention of War, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, academics such as Richard Tanter and others. So very pleased with the number of submissions and the quality of submissions. There was a heavy focus on military and defence and foreign policy issues. We also had a questionnaire as an engagement tool done by over 1,000 respondents. We had each of the panel leaders for the 8 areas present a cross-section of the voices of the Australian people who made the submissions. And I think if you've read the report, you'd agree that there's a very high quality of writing and summarising of very complex issues into the report. And the inquiry process report, we believe, confirms the huge collective value of democracy in action. Here's our panellists and our chair, Kelly Tranter. And their bios are all in the report, as people would have seen. So if you're not familiar with the report, it's structured with a background to the inquiry, with an introduction from our chair, Annette Brownlee, an executive summary by the panel chair, Kelly Tranter, and then a chapter by each of the panel members, followed by 34 recommendations. So just in terms of some of the housekeeping around meeting with a local MP, here's 10 steps outlined. As I said, you will get a copy of this. Probably worthwhile doing a little bit of digging around about your MP. What's their portfolio, any committees they're on. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that I'm happy to share that has which politicians have signed the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Worth finding out if they've made any statements about war powers reform. So, yep, a web search generally brings up most of this information, and you can find out information from the parliamentary website as well. We advise, if you can, attending with somebody else. It's always better, I think, having 2 people in a meeting, moral support, bounce ideas off before you meet, but also someone who can take notes and someone who can lead the meeting. And we're asking people to send a letter to their MP in advance, requesting to meet and discuss the report. And I've got a template letter that I'll email people out the next day or so, and I'll show you that shortly. And people will need to tailor that to their individual MP.
Just on that, Jonathan,
yep,
with the letter, do you want it to be a hard copy or email letter? Which is preferred?
I would think
or both.
Both.
Okay.
Maybe an email and with a note saying hard copy's on its way. Just in terms of, yep, getting the ball rolling. I think doesn't hurt to do both. Yep. And if you don't hear a reply within several weeks, I'd be following up with a phone call. If no appointment is made, you don't hear back from them. Sometimes politicians have a regular place where they meet or stand at a public place to meet locals. So that's another option for trying to meet with your politician, or even if that's a way of introducing yourself in the shorter term and saying, hey, I've sent a letter to you, looking forward to reply, I'd really like to meet with you about this report. Prepare for the meeting with key asks, issues to discuss, and we'll go through that a little bit more. The letter refers to that as well. Read, revise the lobbying tips for meeting with politicians. So we're going to go through some of those shortly. Arrive early, make sure you have a copy of the report. Seems elementary, but yep, just to have your little checklist before you go. Now, depending on how the meeting goes, you might like to ask your politician at the end of the meeting if it's okay to take a photo with the report as a prop, and mentioning to them that, you know, IPAN would like to use that through social media. Now, they may not respond in the affirmative, but there's no harm asking if they're happy to have a photo shoot. And politicians generally like to be seen with members of the public in positive kind of settings and have their photo taken. So you may find that, yeah, a number would be willing for that to happen. Then afterwards, if you can feed back to me via email the discussion you had with the MP and any response. It only needs to be very brief, but we do want to keep track of the outcomes from each of those meetings and build a little bit of a database on connection with politicians. Any very quick questions on any of that, or does that seem relatively clear? Now, can people see the template letter? Is that readable? Where is it? Okay. So as I said, I'll email this out. People just need to fill in the details of their specific MP, or if they happen to be meeting with a senator at some stage as well. General introduction to IPAN, bit of a brief on kind of IPAN's general concerns around potentially impending conflict, then introducing the report. So key findings of the report, we highlight in the letter the importance of Australians being involved in defence and foreign policy decision-making, issue around Australia's sovereignty, war being a choice rather than inevitability, the need for diplomacy, transparency, accountability, etc., and, you know, our desire that war at all costs is avoided. Now, if you are meeting your local MP, it's really worth putting that in the letter. If you're meeting with an MP outside of your area, then obviously don't put that in, but I think it's really good for the MP to know that they're meeting with someone who's from their electorate. Now, we're suggesting that we don't overload the letters with, I'll have to open up, that was just a, it was just a screenshot, but I'll give you the full letter here. So we suggest not to overload the MP with 10 issues. So we've, in this draft letter, highlighted a number of dot points you can consider, and happy for you to tweak these to suit. But depending on, you know, if your local member is Richard Marles, then you might choose a particular key issue around military and defence. If you're meeting with the Environment Minister, you might choose to focus on the impact of war on the environment. So, yep, maybe choose one or two. Doesn't mean you can't talk about other issues that come up, but just in terms of not overwhelming the letter with too many points. So we've got issues around impact on First Nations peoples, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the need for war powers reform, the need for a shift to self-defence for Australia, the need for increased diplomacy, and tackling climate change. So, yep. And particularly if you're meeting with somebody else accompanying you with the MP, have a bit of a chat beforehand about what you both think would be the best issues to focus on. Now we have a brochure that I'll email to people. Some of you already may have hard copies. And if for some reason you're not able to print copies, then we can work out a way to get some brochures to you. And then, yeah, just adding your own details and your phone number if you're comfortable with listing that, or just your email address. So that's the letter. And so what we have on the IPAN Google Drive is a list of all the federal politicians, all their contact details, and which volunteer will be, or volunteers will be meeting with them. And also we've got a column around whether someone signed the pledge. And we think that's really important to go into the meeting informed. One of the potential asks for a politician is, are they prepared to consider signing the ICAN parliamentary pledge? And if they've already done it, obviously we would make the point of thanking them, congratulating them for signing the pledge, and also talking to them about how they might be able to do more to elevate the issue of the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons through caucus, cabinet, parliament, etc. So most of these details are all very easily findable on the parliamentary website, but if you're having any trouble, flick me an email and I can help out if required. So if people have any further capacity after they've met with the MP in their own electorate, we are trying to fill another 100. So let me know if there's other electorates you might be able to visit. Now we'll just work through about 6 tips around lobbying tips.
Jonathan, can I just say, just before you start this, so these are from the Quaker Peace and Legislation lobbying tips. And so you will be getting a 1-pager with these, like a cheat sheet with these lobbying tips, including a sidebar that's got some fairly specific asks. So things you're directly asking the person you're speaking to do for you, and a little bit of information about that. So I just wanted to drop that in so people don't feel like they have to rapidly, I know they're getting the PowerPoint, but you will get a 1-page cheat sheet to help with this.
Yep. No, thanks, Margaret. So none of us are going to be experts on the issues that all of the issues that we're going to be discussing with MPs, but good to do a little bit of homework on the issue and also on the background of the politician. Know their position on particular issues and potentially that impact on the local community. You may not get more than a few minutes. I mean, you might get a 15-minute appointment. A meeting might be cut short because of a phone call or an urgent matter that arrives on the MP's desk. So using the time wisely is really important. And we've got what's called a lobbying roadmap that we'll email out to people, which can be useful. And maybe, Margaret, you might talk briefly about the roadmap at the end of this little session. Be positive, even if you disagree with the politician. Probably you'll be able to find something that you can agree on. And maybe important to thank them for something you both support. They may not support the war powers reform. They may support the TPNW. So focus on that. Building a long-term relationship with the office is a good investment. So even if you walk away with what may appear like an unsatisfactory outcome, it can still be a positive engagement, and that's an investment into the future. Be polite and respectful to everyone in the office around the table. This is just basic stuff. Not unusual for receptionists, front of house staff to move in and around as politicians come and go. Keep in mind, you may meet with someone, or you may be introduced to someone who looks like a junior member, but usually they report back to senior people and often move up the ranks. So really good, again, to have that positive relationship with them. So don't memorize all the things you need to say. You can practice in advance. You can have dot points in front of you to speak to. You can even take a copy of your meeting notes outline to hand to the minister or the member of parliament to have in front of them. Yeah, particularly if you need key figures in your head, make sure they're written down. Important to make it really clear to the MP why you're going to the trouble of meeting with them. As I said, don't need to be an expert. If you're unsure how to answer a question, don't feel you've got to give any answer. You can take it on notice, and so that you'll get back to them as soon as possible. You know, the earliest you can get back to them, obviously, the better, but may take a few days or something to dig around to get an answer. But thank them for the question and tell them you'll get back to them, you know, as quickly as you can. So use a buddy system, build a delegation. So you may be more likely to get a meeting if you're coming with a couple of people or a few people and maybe representative of your community. Divergence of cultures, genders, etc. This is an interesting one, Margaret.
So let me jump in on this one a little bit.
Yep.
So having been on both sides of the lobbying table, the assumption is when a group of people or an individual or two people come to lobby you, they're actually really well networked. This is why they're at the table. And they are going to turn around and quite probably tell everybody in their networks how this meeting went. So when you see the roadmap, you'll see that there's an opportunity for a very brief introduction. And in that introduction, what you want to do is give as diverse a introduction of yourself as you can. So I put up the Sue Smiths from Small Town as an example there. Because when you're sitting on the opposite end of the table, what your delegation looks like is really important, but also who they are is really important. What you want to hear is the story that brings these people to the table, especially if you're meeting with somebody in government, because if you're meeting with somebody who's in government, they will have received a complete meeting brief from their department. So not only has your organization been really well tracked, but they actually have a pretty good idea of where you're coming from. So what they want to know is what your stories are, why it is that this is passionate to IPAN. So that's why this lobbying tip, it's not, even if there's just two of you, you're both men, you're both Anglo, you're both the same age, talk between the two of you in advance to find the diversity in your stories so that you can actually accentuate those differences and the diversity of the networks you bring, because that's what's going to impress the person sitting across the table from you, whether it's an elected politician or a public servant, is how many people you're going to be able to turn around and talk to. And so that's it sounds very manipulative, but it's not. It's just actually putting your best foot forward so that you can make the biggest impact with the person on the other side of the table.
I'd describe it as informative rather than manipulative. Thanks for that context. That's really helpful. And I mean, I guess my question back to you, so Margaret, you're saying they'd really do some homework on IPAN and brief themselves beforehand, okay, despite the extreme busyness.
If they're elected, I mean, if they're an elected official, they've got somebody behind them. If they don't, they're not in office, they're out of office. They will still put a staff, or I've worked for a number of people who are out of government as well as people in government, and they will put a staffer onto it because they want to get something out of this meeting too.
Yep.
And so if you can have a really visibly diverse body, that's really helpful, because meetings can be shortened. It just happens. There's a division called or a phone call's made. It can also happen because that's the way they've set it up. So they may have booked you for 15 minutes, but in reality, they're only going to give you 5. So somebody comes in and says, oh, I'm sorry, Senator, very busy, important thing you have to go and do, where maybe that's not the case. So it's really important to present yourself that you actually want to talk to us, because we're really well networked. And if you talk to us, we're going to turn around and talk to 50 more people. And we know exactly what we want you to do for us. So you'll see that in the roadmap. Makes that a bit more clear.
Yep, great. Thanks, Margaret. Have one strong ask. So having a concrete ask is really important. What is it that we would like the politician to do? And so this requires a bit of thought beforehand. Will it be on the TPNW, either signing the pledge if they haven't, or making a public statement in support of it? If it relates to legislation, make sure the meeting, the politician or their rep knows exactly which bill you're talking about. And if you can have a fact sheet on the issue, or a one-page document which has your ask, bring that along. And also really important to make sure you leave your contact details behind, so that you can have follow-up around that ask. And follow up again. So sending a thank you note afterwards is a really positive thing to do. And I guess it's about what we talked about earlier about building a long-term relationship with the office. And it may not be you personally, but it would be IPAN's representatives building a long-term relationship with the office. And phone call, email is good. Another lobby visit is also obviously very, very helpful in building that relationship. So any other general comments, Margaret, before we look at the lobby roadmap?
All right.
Oh, after you, Margaret.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, one of the other things that I thought of in that section that wasn't there is, in the past, I've been at various public events where the local MP has also been and taken photos of her or them at that event. So I was wondering if presenting them with a little album of themselves in community would work or would be a good idea.
Yeah, actually, before I answer that, Jonathan, I'm not able to screen share. So if you need to do
I'm just doing it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think in this day and age, it's easy enough to kind of rock up with your phone and say, oh, can I take, is it okay to have a selfie, and and then have an exchange, and then just say I'm just putting it out through the IPAN network. Every visit we've done in Australia where we've done that, and I've got some really great photographs of us doing stuff, we've actually, the office has also taken photographs. And so we've put them out through the IPAN network, or not the IPAN network, but the Quaker network.
All right, that doesn't answer the question that I asked.
Oh, okay, sorry.
The question that I asked was about if you already have those photos, not potentially taking new ones. We already discussed taking new ones.
Yeah, so I think the thing is in my experience, is making sure it's okay with the politician to circulate the photograph in any capacity. So if you're taking photographs and then sending it back to the politician, that's probably fine. But it's an image thing, it's their image, and by having their image out there, do they still agree with whatever it was that they said they would do? Do you see what I mean? In the sense that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about
that. I suppose it was about an ongoing connectivity, ongoing, show of ongoing support. Yeah, a show of ongoing support, and here's the evidence, and you're the person celebrated in this evidence. Anyway, just the thought outside of the square. We're working in regional areas is a bit, the people they're not always up to date with national politics. They're more focused on local politics.
Jonathan, I still can't screen share, Jonathan.
I'll be 1 second.
No worries. I'll just talk a little bit about the roadmap. So the idea of a roadmap is just to help keep the delegation on track, so that you actually, you know what you're doing as a delegation. Some of it's very practical. You'll see that the roadmap is divided into 3 parts: logistics, roles, and the flow of the meeting. So the logistics part is just who are you meeting with? Where do you go? What are the contact details for the office and for each other? I've been up at Parliament House, and delegates, I've had members of the delegation get lost. Very easy to do. Or meetings have been moved. So you were going to meet in meeting room A, and now you're meeting in room 12. That's very handy. So thanks, Jonathan. So you'll see this, the version that we're sending out to you is a little bit, it looks a little bit different, but it's quite like this. So the name of the member of the parliament, the senator, it's partly for roll keeping. So you guys have a record of who you've met with, when you've met with them, which is really useful. The date and the time, again, these things have been changed. We've had meetings moved days and things, so it's good to keep that in mind. Where you're meeting, who the members of your delegation are, and how to contact them in case they get lost or they're running behind. Then key roles, you have a group leader or a head of delegation, and this is usually the person who the office has had the most contact with. So the key point of contact for the office. They thank the parliamentarian or the staffer for the meeting. You talk about who the group is. We're the Independent Peaceful Australian Network, and we're here to talk to you about how using our report can help you in finding your way clear to support actions that prevent war. Brief summary of the group. The other thing that's really important about the group leader is that they keep the meeting on track. So in our experience, we usually have people role play this a lot. So if the person you're speaking to, like the minister, gets off track, or if the delegation itself gets on track, it's up to the group leader to pull it back to the ask. So you can use things like, oh, that's a really interesting point, Senator. Thank you for making it. Today, though, we're here to ask you to please talk to your colleagues about voting against war, or whatever it is your ask is. So your head of delegation needs to be able to pull the conversation back, regardless of whether it's the person you're speaking to who gets sidetracked or a member of the delegation. The group leader is also responsible for making sure the ask gets asked 3 times, unless you get a really strong no, and making sure that the first ask is done quickly in case the meeting is shortened. Jonathan, do you want to scroll down a bit? The second key role is the note taker, and this is the person who takes notes. They're also the person who responds to any questions on notice from the office or the person you're meeting with, and also sends the thank you notes. So this is really important because it means everybody else can take notes if they want, but that responsibility is only with one person. So that person will make sure, as part of their role, to go around the table. If the senator, we'll say senator for now, has staffers there, you want to know who the staffers are and what their roles are. So you've got one person who's looking after that. A third key role is a storyteller. And this is a person who has a really interesting or is able to tell their story about how the particular topic or the ask, the issue impacts their family, their community, their town. So when we've done it before, we get people together, we ask everybody to tell us what their story is, and then we help build one of those stories. So the storyteller doesn't always have the opportunity to tell their story, but if you do get the full time, this is the person who tells their story. It's not usually a subject matter expert. It's usually just somebody who sees how NDIS has really changed their family. And so this is part of, this is the third key role, but not the most necessary one. The rhythm of the meeting is that your head of delegation says, thank you for meeting with us. We're here to talk about saving the planet, and how we want you to talk to other members about this process. You do a whip around the table. Everybody briefly gives their names and a community connection. So again, that goes back to the roadmap or the top tips. And that way, you know everybody who's in the room. And importantly, the person who's at the other end of the table knows who's in the room. It's really useful, especially if there's a lot of constituents around the table, because every constituent is about 20 votes. So it's very useful for the person to know that. Somebody makes a thank you. So it could be one of your key speakers. If there's just two of you, you can swap off and on this, or it could be a third person. So if you have a larger delegation, it's really useful to give everybody a voice in participating in this. Partly because if everybody gets a chance to say something in a large delegation, they're more likely to go out and lobby in a smaller group. So you're building skills within your group. So this is where you thank them for something that the person has done that you support. It could be that they voted for a related bill. So I know Alicia Payne voted for a bill that helped to soften the blow of cost of living increases. So you say, oh, I really appreciate voting for this. The example that's in your lobbying tips is Sue from Small Town says, thank you so much for coming to the Flood Recovery Network. That was really important. So it's something that one thank you that the group supports. Again, it's to say, look, we realize you do good stuff. Then the ask is made by, could be the head of delegation or someone else. So I've given a few specific examples there based on some US stuff. One of the most useful asks is, especially if it's someone who's supportive of what you're saying, is can you talk to your colleagues? Can you make a statement in Parliament? Would you be willing to make a public statement that we could put out through our networks? So again, when you get the top tips, cheat sheet, it's got some very specific asks embedded in that so you can see what they look like. Then the personal community story would be made by number 4. If you want to scroll a bit there, Jonathan. And so that's what your storyteller would do. Number 5, if there's any questions that can be answered at the time. And again, as Jonathan said, you can always take questions on notice and get back to people right away. What we found really useful is to just send those questions to a central area and get them answered, which I think probably Jonathan and the rest of the ICC or the rest of the CC would do. And then someone does a wrap up, which is often your head of delegation. If the ask hasn't been completely turned down, you make it for another time. You see if there's a way to follow up. And the example that's been given there is that if it's a vote, given that the vote is taking place on Tuesday, can we follow up with you on Monday and see if your boss has made a decision? And if they have, and it's in support of what we think, would you be willing to go public with it? Make sure their contact information is exchanged and to thank the staff or the politician. And then the note taker does the email of thanks. So really one of the key things is for your group to decide what your ask is going to be, and that will be influenced quite a bit by whoever you're speaking to. So if the person you're speaking to, for example, sits on the education subgroup of finance committee, all this information is on the Australia Parliament House website, then that's the tactic you might want to take. You might want to take a strong education and economic approach to the report. So this is what's in the report, Senator, and this will help give you another perspective of how Australians are feeling about this critical issue. So it's just a way to kind of personalize it a bit. I've been on both sides of the roadmap. I've had people use the roadmap when they've come to lobby my boss or me in a couple of cases. And it's really great because it's quite fluid. The group is really positive. They're really confident. You can have a couple of second asks in your hip pocket. So I had a group come to me. Their ask was something that just couldn't be done. They made the right tactic. They asked twice. And I said twice, no, I can't go there, but I'm happy to talk about something else. And they had in their hip pocket a second ask, which I could do. I was happy to jump on and get my boss to do it. And the third ask that they had, I was also happy to jump on and get my boss to do it. So it's useful to have your key ask. And if they can't do that, then have a couple of hip pocket or backup asks that you might have more success with. But you don't want to overwhelm the meeting. It's much better to stick to one ask. And the other good thing about this, I guess, from the lobbying perspective, is that it does give, especially people who are, you know, kind of coming back to lobbying or haven't had a great deal of experience, a process by which to kind of move through. Even if you can't get through the whole thing, it gives you an idea of how to do it. It is really, really useful to get your group, even if it's just another person, together before you meet, long before you meet, and do a bit of practicing. How does this, you know, this is who I am. Just practice having a meeting and seeing if you can get, you know, a spouse, or I've had my teenage kids be the minister, you know, and I ask them questions and they kind of, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm really busy. And so how do you cope with those things? How do you field questions? How do you do things? So if you can set up a little practice, do a bit of role playing. When we do our big workshop trainings, we have lots and lots of role playing. And it's just so that if you wind up in a meeting room that's a bit shock and awe, you can continue to go through the meeting. If something gets derailed or something happens, you can keep going. And yeah, it gives you a bit of a formula, but you don't have to like stick to it like glue. But it is a tactic. It is a good way to do it. I will say there are lots of other examples on the website. So if you do a search, lobbying tactics or lobbying ways or something like that, there are quite a few that are going up. QPLC uses this one because it works for us. And also it works for the Friends Committee on National Legislation in the US. And this is all they do. And they do it really, really effectively. If you do have a meeting, I think, Derek, you said you came out of a lobbying meeting and it was a bit of a disappointment. That's, you know, meetings sometimes are disappointing to both sides or one side or the other, but it's just all a part of building that relationship and seeing the positive side of it all. I guess from a non-Quaker perspective, yeah, everybody loves Australia. You know, everybody really values this country, loves living here, wants to raise their family here, likes to go to the beach, likes to climb the mountains. And maybe after that, there's some difference of opinions about what's best for Australia. But you know, there are things that we do have in common, and it is part of building that relationship. And people can surprise you. We had a meeting with a member of the coalition that we weren't expecting anything out of. And we were quite surprised to discover that he was 100% on board with us, but just couldn't go public. And so we were able to ask him if he'd have some quiet conversations with his other members of the coalition, which he did. And so you never know. And you never know what people might think about after you've left the meeting. So yeah, it's just a useful thing to give people a sense of how to proceed in a meeting, and also how to try and pull the meeting back on track if it gets distracted by either the delegation or the member you're speaking to. Yeah. So again, Jonathan's going to send this out. We have a couple of versions. We've got one with prompts, which kind of looks like this one, and then one without any prompts that you can just take with you and fill out.
With this roadmap, it looks like we're controlling the meeting, but the reality is the meeting, I assume, will be controlled by the MP. How do you have any advice on, you know, obviously you don't want to interject and kind of take over the meeting, but how to subtly ensure that we can control as much as possible the agenda?
Yeah, so, and David may have a different take on this, or the rest of you who've got some experience. My experience is that it's actually more the lobbyists who set the pace up to a point. You know, they're there, they want to hear what you've got to say. But if it does get off track, you know, then you can say that's such an interesting point, Senator. I'm really glad you brought it up. Today, though, we really want to focus back on this, and you know, and then pull it back onto what you want to talk about. The tricky thing is, in my experience, is really getting your delegation to be disciplined more than the office, because I was part of a very tiny team that set up a meeting with the Prime Minister and a community group. And this was several years ago, and the Prime Minister slightly derailed it. They could have pulled it back, and they didn't. They bought into the derailment, hook, line, and sinker. And then the Prime Minister had to leave, and they were really pleased. Like, oh, what a great meeting. And we're just looking at them going, and then they realized that they'd gotten derailed by the Prime Minister. So, you know, even in that case, though, if the head of delegation had said, oh, absolutely, Prime Minister, cricket is a great sport. And it's one of the things that brings Australia together, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. So bringing it back. And the PM would have gone, yeah, okay. You know, whoever you talk to, they get it. They know what you're about. And in a way, they kind of respect that. You're here to talk about your things, and you just kind of try and pull it back. If you lose it, you lose it. But it's really more the lobbyists, in my experience, the delegation who sets the pace.
Yep. No, thanks for clarifying. And if the meeting is cut short, I mean, my suggestion would be that anything not covered in the meeting can then get part of the email summary, and you talk about sending notes from the meeting to the staffers, which I think is a great idea, with us, I guess, a summary of the ask, and, you know, this is what you've committed to do. And also, by the way, we had hoped to cover X, Y, Z, you know, in the meeting as well, but unfortunately it's cut short.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that's why you want to get your ask in early.
Yep.
Because if the meeting is cut short, at least you've gotten it in there once.
Yep.
And if you put the ask in your letter, if you know what your ask is and you put it in your letter, there are several things that happens from the other side of the table. It would help me build a delegation, the people I wanted around the table to hear what you had to say. I had a group come once and they wouldn't tell me what they really wanted to talk about. They just were very vague. So I got a bunch of people around the table, and they were very passionate people, very, very passionate people. And they wanted to tell us about this program that was down in Victoria that they thought should go national. And I tried to interject, and they said, no, this is the problem. You never listen, you just talk. And so people kept leaving because, you know, there was no point being there. And at the end, they were like, all right, well, what do you want to say? And I said, well, that's actually our project. It is a national project. We fund it for many millions of dollars. We have funded it. We're glad to hear you love it. We love it too. And they said, that's not possible. And I said, but here's the person who's managing it, for, you know, Australia. So it's really important to do your homework. And if you get a funny vibe, somebody says, oh, can we talk more about that point? It's probably worth stopping and listening to what they have to say, because it could be that you didn't, you know, it was something you just didn't pick up on. So, yeah. It's really a lot of fun on both sides, you know, and it's the sort of thing where I don't think I ever, when I was on the opposite side of the table, I was so glad to have community people come and talk, because that's something you can't get, especially with everything on the web these days. You know, departments sit on the websites, they dig into Facebook, they go places normal people don't go. But what they don't get is they don't get the voice of people at the table saying, look, we are really concerned. We're going to go to war. We are really concerned about this. This is no longer a joke. And this is something we're taking very seriously, and we need you to take it very seriously. So that's what's kind of missing. And a roadmap or something similar to that is just one way to help make that communication go smoothly.
Thank you. That was great, Margaret. Very informative, and there'll be some time for questions shortly in relation to that. Lost my PowerPoint.
While you're looking for that, Jonathan, just a comment from, I used to work in an area which was a lot drier perhaps than this area, but my technique was to have a slide pack, a printed slide pack with dot points, and that really is a focus of the meeting, keeps everyone in control. So and I would leave that behind. And I think Margaret touched on that technique, but I never really had a problem with the meeting heading off in the wrong direction, because it always came back to, and they had the agenda, if you like, in front of them. So, and by the way, that Margaret mentioned a trial run through, which was very great. And the other, seeing that we're still looking for things here with Jonathan. While I was listening to Margaret, I've noticed people around the table are almost my age. What I'm thinking is that I will bring my niece or my nephew to the meeting, probably as a note taker, but as someone passionately in representing that generation. And I think I'm very conscious of the need to balance the fact that I'm a different generation.
Yeah, I think you've really tapped on something there, which is kind of in the lobbying road tips too, is to make your group as diverse as possible. So I actually had a young friend when I lobbied in Washington a couple of years ago. I had a young friend she put herself out there as a young lobbyist, just to be the visual young person. She was happy just to go and introduce herself. But because she realized that a lot of things she was really concerned about, her generation is all about climate change, and she's all about no war. And so she realized that a lot of the groups that her parents were involved in didn't have many young people involved. And so she kind of put herself out as a young person for hire. She didn't take money for it, but she was quite happy to be a young person. And I think that's, I mean, it kind of tells us a lot of other things, but I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, thanks for those comments, David and Margaret. So I haven't got too long to go. The next 6 slides are just a bit of a taste of some of the key issues that the report brought out around some of the prominent areas. So we'll just quickly run through those, just to give an idea of the kind of things you might be able to include in a letter or include in the meeting. So a couple of the key things that came out around impact on First Nations peoples, the need for adequate, appropriate and meaningful consultation with First Nations peoples. And the recommendations called on the need to practice adequate, appropriate and meaningful consultation with legitimate stakeholders and custodians or in any kind of negotiation around use of land for military exercises, and that this must occur in all consultations and negotiations regarding use of lands and waters in accordance with the UN concept of free, prior and informed consent. So I guess, yeah, if people are meeting with politicians who have the portfolio around First Nations or particularly Richard Marles in relation to his role as Defence Minister and negotiations potentially around docking of ships or submarines, etc., that these kind of issues are front and centre in some of the discussions. The need for increased diplomatic efforts, so that people are saying we don't want any war with China, we want to promote the role of the United Nations in peace efforts, we want more resources into diplomacy, etc. Came out through the report. The TPNW was a very key issue for the 8 chapters, had a recommendation around Australia signing and ratifying the treaty, and some of the key points around banning all nuclear weapons entering Australia, rejecting nuclear warships or aircraft, establishing a peace and disarmament ministry, which New Zealand has. And also one of the recommendations around requiring foreign governments to declare that they will not include nuclear weapons in any armed forces that they send across to Australia. Worth noting, the Prime Minister is a TPNW champion, and the Labor Party has promised to move on signing and ratifying the UN treaty. So for any Labor politicians you're meeting with, if they've signed the treaty already, it's about saying, you know, what more can you do to raise this with your colleagues, raise this in Cabinet, to raise it through Parliament. And for those who haven't signed it, to reinforce the fact that the Prime Minister has signed, he's a champion on the TPNW. The party's promised to move on signing and ratifying. You know, I think the 2018 Labor conference moved a motion about it, and then a subsequent conference reinforced that motion. And there's another Labor conference this year. So using the information that we have, these tools at our disposal to reinforce our message and reinforce the ask. War powers reform. Obviously, the report on war powers has come out, which is very disappointing. It effectively seems the status quo will remain. But again, it's a very important issue that came out of the report. I'd encourage people, if they're wanting to take this issue on in a meeting, that you look at the Australian for War Powers Reform website to see what kind of the latest information there is, and their recommendations around how we can move forward on the issue. Shift to self-defence for Australia was a big part of the report. Some of the key points in the report came out being that the defence budget being for defending Australia only, not for offensive reasons. The need for community consultation regarding a new defence policy of the Australian public, clearly through this inquiry report, have indicated they want to be part of these discussions. We don't want to be left out of them, and we don't want these decisions just made by politicians. But as with any area of critical public policy, NDS, health, housing reform, defence, we want the Australian public involved. Industry focus on self-defence, moving away from jobs for war into sustainable work options. Urgently reviewing AUKUS, reviewing renegotiating AUKUS, eliminating overseas military from Australia, and stopping the joint exercises with the USA. And with all these discussions, it's really critical to say the inquiry report, which consulted widely across the country, came up with these are the views of the Australian people, as seen in the submissions that were made. Just on that,
yep, Jonathan,
yep.
The Defence Strategic Review, they formally dropped the Defence of Australia. Now they call it National Defence. It's really offensive force posture that prepared to engage in Indo-Pacific. So, yeah, that's something to.
So we can.
Yeah, really. It's really important. A shift in that DSR. So it's something to. If you're going to take that issue on, to emphasise what a retrograde step it is.
Yep, major concerns with that shift. Yep.
Mm.
Are you able to email me an excerpt from the Defence Review that illustrates that, and then I can
actually, Bevan sent to me anyway a good analysis of it, and so I can pass it on.
If you send that on, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
And look, just on this, and it's not public.
Sorry, Jonathan, can I just ask a question?
Yep.
On this particular area, my thoughts would be to avoid it, but Ukraine, Sudan, Yemen, Taiwan, one assumes that they're all traps that we would avoid.
I agree. Were you sort of hinting that we wouldn't raise these with?
Well, if
selectively,
well, that's the question I'm asking. My initial reaction is that they're incredibly complex, and they would a discussion of that can become very heated very easily, and can lead down a rabbit hole very quickly. So my thought is to avoid it. But I don't know what your view is, but I mean, I'd love to talk about those issues, but I know very well where that leads.
Well, I
And,
don't
yeah.
think we should avoid all aspects of that. I mean, obviously, the prospect of a coming war with China is very relevant, and she'll know that I'm in the Labor Party. When we go to see my local member, it's important for them to realise that people within the Labor Party, you know, are very concerned about the prospect of a war over Taiwan or whatever, and nuclear war.
Yeah, sorry, my comment would be there's not, was just that's a trap that I could see very, very easily, that you need to keep it at that high level thing. But I would have thought that if you know, if I got into a detailed discussion on the Ukraine war, I'm sure I would piss half the people off on this call. Sorry.
Oh yeah, fair enough. I agree with you about don't get into a detailed discussion about them.
That was, but
the Ukraine
you
war.
know, I'm a guest on this forum, so
Okay.
well,
Oh,
I'm
look,
involved with it.
Yeah,
I
no.
certainly agree. You know, like Ukraine, it's so far away, and we have very little to do with it. Although it's going to be a bit awkward with the issue of because of AUKUS is really designed around containing and pushing back at China and our involvement with freedom of navigation and all that sort of stuff in the South China Sea. It's going to be a little hard to avoid that one. I know all I would suggest is, you know, state our IPAN position politely and agree to disagree, and certainly not get into an angry polemic about it, for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's where they're, you know, broad touch but move on would be the principles rather than the actual detail.
Yep, and being clear that from the IPAN inquiry report, the people of Australia who contributed are clearly saying we want to avoid war, we want diplomacy, we want Australia to be an example in our region as a good neighbour. We shouldn't just have an alliance with the USA, we need to build strong alliances with Indonesia, etc. So yeah, I agree at that broad level, recognising that there are obviously specific concerns, as you've highlighted, David. But I think coming back to the people who contributed to this inquiry, ordinary Australians are saying X, Y, Z. It's not just my opinion or your opinion, it is, we're reflecting what's come through this people's inquiry. The other thing people could do, and Ross, our IPAN treasurer and Queensland rep, is collating information on Labor branches that have moved motions opposed to AUKUS. And that can be useful information to take to say, we know that there is a divergence of opinion amongst Labor despite what's happening at the policy level. And we want to keep putting that forward to politicians. Also, Vince Scapatura, who may be known to most people here, has written in conjunction with a number of academics an open letter from academics that's going to be publicly released, I would assume, by the end of May. And if that's public out there before people meet, then there may be some key points people can draw on it, or at least saying we're aware that 100 prominent Australian academics have raised significant concerns about AUKUS, including, you know, X, Y. So we'll continue to keep people updated with any, you know, new information that comes to hand around that.
I just say that I think it's very important that Labor Party members hear that, you know, I mean, Labor Party politicians hear that the Labor Party membership is concerned about AUKUS. So I think it's important that we do. You know,
Shiraz, did you have a question or wanted to make a comment?
I did. It's sort of past now. But I suppose I agree with what David said, that I would avoid most of engaging in debate. I think that our purpose is to focus on sharing the report and the benefits of the report, and not engage necessarily in debate. Is what I'd add. Yeah,
totally agree. And I think it's about stating this is IPAN's position. We're aware government has a different position, but we think it's really important for you to understand the Australian people have said this, this, and this.
Yep.
And people from all walks of life, from ordinary Australians, academics, former political leaders, etc., diverse, cultural, multicultural groups, etc., have all contributed to this inquiry. Then on climate change, we had recommendations around tackling climate change over expenditure on military, no greenhouse gas emissions by any military, having an acknowledgement of the environmental damage caused by US wars was one of the recommendations. And, people can read the environment section in the report, and there's probably some other issues that could be gleaned if this is the area you want to focus on. So that's some of the major issues covered in the recommendations. I've just done an extra slide with some messaging around AUKUS, and look, I have had a sneak preview at Vince's letter, and I've pulled a few things out. I'll try and make that bigger, and there may be many other issues that we would need to highlight, but this will be in the PowerPoint. Just a few things, for people to keep in mind around a concern around the agreement around the nuclear powered subs. The fact that the underlying strategic rationale behind AUKUS hasn't been adequately explained to the Australian people. Huge financial cost, great uncertainty, puts us at odds with our closest neighbours, distracts us from addressing climate change, increases the risk of the threat of nuclear war, erodes Australia's defence autonomy, and the shift in policy, whereas there's recognition that some submarine capability is critical for Australia, surveillance protecting our shores, but does it require offensive long-range power projection capabilities provided by SSNs? And until recently, the answer had been no. And so this is quite a very significant policy direction. Non-proliferation risks, and the need for, and this I watched Brian Toohey, and I suggest he spoke at the Australian Anti-AUKUS Coalition webinar at the end of March, and he talked about the fact that we still have not had a proper and forensic public discussion about other options, and the study of other subs options by males. It's just been decision made without any very thorough forensic analysis. So that's something that Brian Toohey certainly believes we should be calling for. So yeah, I've got the link down there for the Anti-AUKUS webinar where Brian Toohey spoke, Vince Scapatura spoke, and Alison Branowski from Australians for War Powers Reform spoke as well. So well worth it, even if it's not a key issue you want to talk with your politician about, it's still well worth watching. I've also got Josh Wilson's speech in Parliament, and this may be something that people might again raise with parliamentarians around the fact that there is some disquiet within the ranks. So the Quakers have done a summary of what he said on the 20th of March. People can read all that. Is that big enough?
Yeah. It's big enough. Jonathan is muted.
Who's muted?
You were, I think.
Okay, yep. I wasn't, so I was just going to let people read this. Yep.
Oh, I see.
Sorry, rather than me read the whole thing. So yeah, I'll include that in an email out the next day or two. And coming to the end, some frequently asked questions. How do I confirm which MP I'll be visiting? I can actually, people, I actually might just bring, given there's a small number of us, I'll bring up the spreadsheet. We can see where their name's associated. Is that too small for people to read?
No,
I've got Colin Sindel, Labor McNamara, that's Josh Burns. Josh has signed the treaty. Derek, I've got you down for Steve.
You want to share that, Jonathan?
Is it
Can't
not?
really see.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we
Oh.
can't see what you're seeing.
Okay. Thank you. Is that better? Can people read that or see it?
Yes.
Just
Even if you can't read it,
Yes.
I'll just quickly go
It's a bit
through.
small.
So Colin's name's next to Josh Burns. Josh has signed the IPAN pledge. Derek's Steve Georgianis, is it? He's signed the pledge. I've also got you next to James Stevens as the member for Sturt.
yeah, I'm in that electorate. Yeah.
Yep. And then Josh is in the, sorry, Steve's in the Adelaide electorate.
Yeah.
Peter Harpus and Doug Melvin also put his hand up for Boothby, which is Louise Miller-Frost.
I'm going to see her with Peter Harpers.
Okay.
My name isn't on this list.
I've just put it on now. I had you down for Josh Burns. If I don't know why. He's
Wrong column.
Burns.
That's the wrong column.
That's my last name
Colin,
is Mitchell.
sorry. Yes, sorry. Yep. Thank you. Okay. And Doug Melvin, do you know Doug, Peter?
Not personally, no.
But Derek does.
I know. Yeah.
Yep. So
Yep.
Doug's also put his hand up to do that. If the three of you can liaise, I'll send a joint email to the three of you. I'm down for our local Holly Marion. Oh, sorry, go back up. So Robin, you're in the ACT. Alicia
Yes.
Payne.
Alicia, yes.
So David Perkins has put his hand up as well as Catherine Kelly if you need an extra person. I presume you know both David and Catherine.
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll put you in touch via email.
Thank you.
Could
Mary,
I just ask,
sorry, yep.
please, Jonathan,
Yep.
I don't have the information in front of me. Is Louise Miller-Frost signed the ICAN pledge?
Sorry, thank you. I should have pointed that out. Where are we? Yes, she has.
She has. Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yep.
What about Alicia Payne? I think she
has.
may have.
She has. Yep. Who else have we got in the room? Shanaz, I've got you down for Fiona Phillips. She's also signed the pledge. And David, is there a electorate? Whereabouts are you based?
Higgins. So you've got me down with Paul. So if you go to Higgins on
Yep.
just below,
I'll find it.
on the left.
I'll go alphabetically.
Number 50, Jonathan. You got him down at
Okay.
number 50.
Thank you. Yep, fantastic. And do you know Paul?
I don't.
Okay. Paul's academic at Monash Uni. I'll put the two of you in contact
Good.
via email. And Margaret Clark, I'm not sure if I saw your name, and I'm not sure whether you put your hand up or whether you'd like to. That's okay. Did I miss anybody else?
I
think that's-
had also nominated to see the local state MP.
Yep.
What's his name? Dr. John Holland, Labour MP.
Yep.
I don't know.
Okay,
if
no,
that's on the
fantastic.
list.
Look, at this stage, given 76 senators who are not going to initially prioritise unless people have a relationship with them, kind of prioritising the premiers and chief ministers. But if people can see other local members, that's fantastic. Just let me know and I'll add it to the list when you've had the visit.
He's pushing health issues, so health and war.
Yep.
All the AUKUS money is being detracted from the health system in regional areas. So it's a good push.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And just some frequently asked questions. How do I confirm which MP? Well, I've done that and I'll follow up through email. Further copies of the IPAN report you can order through the IPAN website. There's also a QR code you can directly order from here. If you'd like to seek some advice from IPAN prior to meeting your MP, if you've got any questions following up from here, feel free to call Margaret or myself. Is that okay, Margaret? Yep. If you want someone else to accompany me, absolutely. As we talked about, having more than one person, having two or three, having a divergence is really, really useful. And providing feedback to IPAN after the meeting, if you can just send me some dot points of, just might be key issues covered were Self-Defence of Australia and the TPNW. Outcome was, or the ask was this, and any other outcome. So it just can be very brief that we'll kind of put into this spreadsheet. And here are all here's one IPAN rep for each state, a couple for the NT. So if you'd like to talk any further about this with one of the IPAN reps in your state or territory, then here are the contact details. So this will all come out in the PowerPoint. So look, Q&A, any questions that arise from this for either Margaret or myself, or any general comments?
Well done. I look forward to playing with a piece of papers in my hand and getting familiar with them.
Thanks, Shanaz. And so just to confirm, Margaret will send out the roadmap, 2 versions.
And the top tips.
Top tips, yep.
So they've got a 1-page. So the 1-page cheat sheet on top tips with the specific ask sidebar, and the roadmap with prompts and the roadmap without prompts.
Yep.
Excellent.
And you'll send out the letter, the
draft letter.
draft letter, yeah.
As a result of this, I'll add a little line about putting in, if you've got your ask, or when you've got your ask sorted out pre-letter, to actually include the ask in the letter as well. So,
and you'll send out this PowerPoint too?
Send out the PowerPoint, yep.
Good.
I'll probably save it as a PDF. I'll see how it go in terms of size. Yep.
Okay. My request was that that was sent as a package, or that a package with contents. In the contents of this package should be this document, this document, this document, and this document. So I know that we're getting it all through you now, and you tell us which ones are coming. But it'd be nice to have a list of contents.
Absolutely, happy to do that. Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
And will it also be made available on the drive?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
And I'll just add a new slide with package of contents to come out. Yep. All right. Any other questions? I appreciate everyone's time. It was a really informative and useful discussion, and hearing different people's perspectives and experience, I think we'll all benefit from. So thanks again to Margaret for assisting with the hosting of this and your wealth of experience, and good luck, all the best with everyone's visits.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming
Thanks.
and making the time. Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Jonathan.
Did you have a
No,
question,
Thanks,
Peter?
Jonathan.
Thank you.
No, that's a clap.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thanks,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Thanks, Margaret.
David's
Bye.
phone number,
Bye.
please.
Whose phone
Can
number?
I have David's phone number, please?
Who's?
I don't think that David Higgs, I don't
Higgins.
think
Yeah.
I've met him before. And if he's in Canberra, that's a good thing.
Okay, no, I'm actually in Melbourne.
Oh,
So
you're in Melbourne, sorry.
I'm in Melbourne, so I won't say I've retired here because I haven't retired. But I stopped being a lobbyist in 2009.
All right, it'd still be good. All right, next time I'm in Melbourne, I'll come and look you up there.
Absolutely, and in fact, I'll give you, if you haven't got my number, if you got it. Oh, you're driving, so
I'm
I'll
not driving, I'm
share.
standing in
I
a
can
park.
send a
But yeah.
joint email to you both now, and then you can connect.
good.
All right, that'd
Okay.
be great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate
Thanks,
your time.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jonathan.
Bye for
Thank
now.
you. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Cheers. Bye. See ya.